This is Sound Off, where the North County comes to talk on The Right Choice, KPRL.
Welcome to Sound Off. My name is Karen Veely. I'm your host on Wednesday and Thursday afternoons. I'm also an investigative reporter with Cal Coast News. Go to Cal Coast News. There is no paywall. As many of you remember, back with the paid parking issue in Paso Robles, you had a mass amount of the people in the community who didn't want paid parking in the downtown area. You had several business owners that wanted it, and you had the city manager, Ty Lewis, who started wanting it when he was a police chief because they could ticket and then hire new police officers. There were some that wanted the paid parking, but the bulk of the community did not want it. But you had a city council that was doing what Ty Lewis wanted. You had people like Gregory and John Hammond and Sharon Roden who wanted the paid parking. What had happened, though, is you had several people in the community, when they couldn't get the votes from the city council, use the Citizens Initiative, and in a rapid amount of time, we're able to show that a vast amount of the community was signing those petitions. I remember someone telling me they went into a store and they said over the loudspeaker they're taking signatures. They got 21 signatures in a thrift shop of people coming up and wanting to sign. In the end, though, the city fought against it. The city has to approve the initiative. The clerk has to say, you're doing this correctly, this is all right. And then in the end, they said, oh, no, you did this part wrong. And they were trying not to let it go on the ballot. They always have the right to say, we'll go ahead and stop doing it and keep it off the ballot that way. But the cities very often fight back. Today, my guest is Debbie Peterson. She was on the Planning Commission, a city council member, and the mayor of Grover Beach. Since then, she's written books about the corruption in the county and also about good government. She has personally been involved in multiple citizens' initiatives to make changes. We're going to be talking about the process, the fighting back, and different issues with a focus on Grover Beach. This is something that is done everywhere, and it is something that people in every community need to be aware of how they fight back and what you can do if your city council is not listening to you. Debbie, thank you very much for coming on the show today.
Thank you, Karen. I'm very pleased to be here.
And Deb, remind us, what are the names of the two of the books that you have written?
The main one is Happiest: Corruption, Sleaze, Lies, and Suicide in a California Beach Town. And that's a story of the corruption I found as a council member and mayor. And then I have another two or three, and City Council 101 is probably the most relevant for anyone running for office because it tells you what you need to know before you get there. Both available on Amazon.
You were brought up on the show yesterday. I brought up that you were coming on the show tomorrow, and Stu Jenkins brought up the initiative. Now, there's a group of people doing an initiative. You were a primary in the past two initiatives, but you're just a supporter of this one. Can you tell us a little bit about what is going on? What is the initiative about? How many signatures should you gather, and how is this moving forward?
We have two initiatives. One of them actually started out in 2024, and it was based on the fact that the city had been charged with illegally violating election law when they wouldn't allow us to circulate a recall because the city council didn't want it done. That one is to elect our city clerk so that the city clerk is the representative of the people rather than appointed by a city manager. That one is ballot measure A26. The other one that's getting the most attention right now is F26, and that is the No More Tall Buildings, the Citizens Ballot Measure Initiative. And that one has arisen out of really years of frustration because back in 2004, the people of Grover started working very closely with the city to put together some wonderful plans for how they wanted to see it develop. And then during COVID, all of that was overridden. And now, of course, what we're seeing is 5- and 6-story height or 55 to 66 foot tall buildings going up in our coastal zone. And people are very upset about that. That was 1,256 people, which is 50% more than we needed, even when the city reduced the time frame for us to turn in signatures. That one was hugely supported by the people of Grover Beach, and very much so also by tourists and by people outside of Grover Beach, because the concern is that the public views that we voted for in California on a citizens initiative 50 years ago to protect our scenic views, those are being obstructed now.
And that is something the cities, one of their goals was to have it open so people could see right there along the coastline area where they could see the coast. And a 6-story building right
the
there.
Coastal Mountains. Yeah, and the problem is it's not just one. There are 10 in the works right now, and of course the city is jamming them through as quickly as it possibly can now, but people have started to call Grand Avenue the Grand Canyon, because even though it's protected by the local coastal program, and even though the law states really clearly that housing cannot override the Coastal Act, even though all of that happens, the city's doing it anyway.
Yes, this is kind of what I was talking about. I've noticed cities very often try to throw wrenches into these things as they move forward. When you have a bulk of a city council that wants to put in as many 5- and 6-story buildings in the city as they can, and you have the citizens saying, wait a minute, we were supposed to keep these areas, the areas along where the railroad station is and over there right by the entrance to the beach area, that was supposed to be kept lower so you could see out to the ocean.
Lower with less massing, more landscaping, housing being secondary to serving beachgoers, and it would be a coastal visitor serving area. And there was a wonderful vision for that. That is still in the code, but it's been completely ignored, as has some of the law protecting the public views. That law has all been ignored by the city.
I notice they very often find ways to fight back. I have seen where they accuse people of incorrectly collecting signatures. They have the clerks then deny a lot of the signatures for different reasons. Part of the reason you went after a new clerk, didn't this also have to do with the initiative process?
It did, because the city clerk was blocking the recall of 3 of the council members who at the time were pushing through a huge doubling our water rates, and people were very upset about that, and they wanted to recall 3. And the city clerk successfully blocked 2 because it became too late by the time we managed to get it to court. But the third one, the recall of the final council member who had voted in favor of these huge rate increases, that one did get through, and it won with a resounding win, and also not increasing the water rates at that time, won with a resounding win. So we have a great track record for representing what it is the people of Grover Beach want. Unfortunately, the city council has a terrible track record for enforcing what the city wants, and simply has not been listening. And what's so sad is the press and media will speak to the city manager who spin a story, and it's usually lies of omission. In other words, they don't tell you the rest of the law, and the press and media won't read the law. They won't read the correspondence. They won't fact check, and often they don't get the people with the initiative or the concerns don't get a full hearing. Simply the city manager's the authority, and what he says is truth, which is, in our case, it is almost never the truth.
But I will tell you, I have noticed that the public does usually win. I mean, I know when you tried to recall 3 council members and they waited too long and you could only recall 1 because of issues with the city. And that is, again, even a judge said you guys had no right to do that. And
the judge said they violated election law. They were convicted of violating election law.
They violated the rules to do it their way. It's very surprising to me how much of this game playing goes on with city councils, city managers. I've watched city meetings where they talk about how something went down and why they stopped it. And sometimes it's absolutely inaccurate.
It is, and unfortunately in our case we have a council full of yes men and women who, whatever the city manager and community development director want, they do. But that doesn't reflect the wishes of the community that were put together over a course of 10 or 15 years, and it certainly doesn't reflect their wishes today either.
And on the one man that you were able to put on the ballot for a recall, was he recalled?
He was recalled with resounding numbers, strong majority to recall, and then they appointed someone not who represented the wishes of the people in his district, but who opposed the recall in the first place. So it was a successful recall, but not success in getting the city council to follow the will of the people. There are some other people running this year that are much better at listening and have been taking the pulse of the city much more effectively, and if they get in, I think we'll have a very, very different situation at City Hall, which is long needed.
And one of the things I noticed, even on some people I've ended up thinking did a good job, I've been watching city councils and meetings all over the county for decades, and I often notice someone new getting in. They're brand new, they're elected, and they literally listen completely to the city manager and the city attorney in the beginning. And I've had people tell me a couple years into that, the 2 people they can generally terminate from the city council is the city manager and the city attorney. And they're supposed to be the checks and balances. They're not supposed to be the yes man. But I've seen some people that ended up being good council members, but their first year or so, they are really believing whatever the city manager and the city attorney tells them without question.
And the problem is that you go into this role, you're brand new to it, you may have had experience on a board, but you're actually being elected to a board of directors that is supposed to be directing, and to a board of legislators. You're making law. But what happens is you're so new to it, you're really dependent on the city manager and the city attorney to train you to do the job. And that's why I wrote City Council 101, because I want people to understand their role and responsibility. And that responsibility is to represent the people of their community, and the role is to oversee the work of the city manager and the work of the city as a whole, and to create laws related to that. So it's not to be yes men to the city manager or city attorney. It is to represent the people.
I even had a former city council person on my show. It was Sharon Roden, and she actually called him a great boss. The city manager was a great boss. And it was kind of stunning because he's not your boss. In fact,
absolutely not. And you are not an employee of the city. You are an employee of the voters.
Yeah, you're not an employee at all. You're doing service. It's service.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that's how it was intended to be. Look at the George Washington model, and you'll see a model, a public representative.
But I think that's how we get into these holes where they're doing things that the public doesn't want, and they're not listening to the public. They're not listening to the vast amount of the public. And again, that's why the initiative process is so important to the community. The group has filed for an initiative regarding having the 5 and 6 story buildings. Is the initiative nothing higher than 3 or 4 stories?
Essentially what they want to do is they want to repeal the decisions that were made in 2022 where they started allowing these very tall buildings anywhere, pretty much anywhere along Grand Avenue, anywhere there's industrial or commercial zoning. So this initiative has nothing to do with residential zoning, doesn't change it at all, and it only involves commercial areas and our industrial areas, and it limits those heights. And of course, what the YIMBY, yes, in my backyard, people are alleging is that that's going to reduce housing. In fact, it will create more affordable housing, because right now the housing that's being built is 2/3 occupied by out-of-town owners. It's second homes. It's not housing. If they can limit the heights to 3 stories or 40 feet, it will balance these 10 66-foot high buildings that are going in, or up to 66 feet. It'll create a balance. We didn't want any of those, but they're coming. There's nothing we can do about that, but we can stop them from continuing that. We can create a balanced skyline, a better balanced skyline, and maybe retain some of those public views. Here's the odd thing. You would think that that would actually restrict housing, but what will happen is developers will work within whatever the rules are. And if the rules are you can only have 3 stories, they'll just create smaller unit, which will be more affordable. And 3-story buildings are much less expensive to build than 4- and 5-story buildings, because the 4- and 5-story buildings require a lot more insurance, a lot more structural engineering, and they're much more expensive to build. So by reducing those heights, we'll end up with more real housing that the people in Grover Beach and surrounding areas can actually afford to buy. Right now, there are luxury apartments or luxury condos that are running at $1,000 a square foot. So if you've got that reduces a bit, but some of them have been priced as high as $1.4 million.
I've heard they're not selling. Can you talk about that? I've heard there's an issue, and some of the 1.2 millions have been reduced to 800,000, that there is not enough buyers for these condos.
That information is very difficult to verify because it's not in our, I'm a real estate broker. It is not in our multiple listing service for the most part. And for sure, the prices have been reduced. Certainly it was said in a public meeting that only one of the 3 buildings that's selling is sold out.
I know that there's a lot of building going on from North County and some parts of South County. There's a lot of new development. I also see multiple things that are stalled, multiple developments that are not moving through, where they've built some of the homes and some of them they've stalled in the building. And there are some price dropping in some areas. Are there a lot of prices dropping in your area, or is it more just there along the big buildings along the waterfront?
Well, very interesting. The Gary Grossman buildings, Coastal Community Builders, or sometimes called CCB, which is 8 of the buildings of the 10 tall buildings, they are dropping prices. Interestingly enough, prices in Grover Beach as a whole have increased. Now, prices on condos have stayed steady, stayed pretty much the same for 18 months, but prices on single-family homes that have a garage, have a yard, don't have HOA fees, those prices are going up. And they're going up because if you've got a $1.4 million condo with no garage, no yard, and $750 HOA fees, then an appraiser is going to look at the houses with yards and all the rest of it, and they're going to say, man, those are worth a lot more than that. So it's driving housing prices way up to the point that they're certainly now pretty much the same as those you're going to see in Arroyo Grande, and in some cases even are similar to Pismo prices.
The county, I think in the last 5 years, 4 or 5 years, we had 1 year where the population went up and it slight decreases the other years. So we're not having increases in the populations with all the development going on.
No, Grover Beach has dropped, which proves that a lot of the new homes are being bought by out-of-town owners as second homes. But Grover Beach, even though we have a city manager who makes $400,000 a year and an assistant who makes $200,000 a year, even so, we've dropped from over 13,000 to just over 12,000 inhabitants. We've lost 1,000 of our population.
There has been an overall reduction in the population while there's a lot of housing development going on. I think it'll be interesting over the next couple of years to see where the prices end up.
Yeah, it will be. And of course, we can't really predict that. I can say that you would need a salary of $350,000 a year without much borrowing at all in order to be able to afford one of these $1.4 million condos. Only 10% of the people in the state make that much money, and I'm be very surprised if 10% of the people in Grover Beach make that much money. These homes that are being built are not homes for the people of Grover Beach or even San Luis Obispo County. They're homes for people who can afford beautiful second homes, which they believe will have ocean views. But as they continue to put up more tall buildings, every block right now, from the railroad tracks in Grover Beach on the north side of Grand Avenue all the way up to 7th Street, every single one has a full city block, lot line to lot line, of 55 to 66-foot buildings. Plus, they're building some back behind Grand Avenue, both north and south. So they're annihilating the views. And there are some on the south side of Grand as well. They're simply annihilating the views, and they're annihilating the vote of the people who said, we want to protect those views. They're rare, and they're few and they're far between, and we believe the public has a right to them.
And we are talking about what the public does when the city council does not listen to them. The one thing they can do is citizens' initiative to put things on the ballot for change. When you know the bulk of the public wants something, you can get it on the ballot. They collected the signatures to put a ballot measure on stopping the big buildings along certain parts of the city right near the coastal area. And they've got this initiative. They collected more than that they needed, and the city started looking at ways to stop it and started finding things that they didn't like about it. And Debbie, one of the things that I have heard, and tell me what is going on here, is that developer Gary Grossman, who the bulk of the big buildings that have built the city already are through Gary, his attorney has offered to help the city fight the initiative. Is that accurate?
Yes, Gary Grossman, one of our candidates at a builder's meeting very near to our city manager and a representative from Coastal Community Builders, Gary Grossman's company. And the representative said, well, we would be more than happy to provide our attorneys to the city of Grover Beach to help you fight this no more tall buildings ordinance. Now, the city manager, we're going to say maybe partly to his credit, said, oh, well, it's going on the ballot. Well, but he didn't say, don't incentivize me, don't give me your attorney or any of that. He just said it's going on the ballot. So we left it open for all kinds of illegal shenanigans, which we believe are happening. I put in a public records request to the city and to the HCD, the Housing and Community Development Division of the state, for any communication correspondence between them and the city to find out what was really being said, what was really being done. And turns out that at that time, they really refused to do what the city was badgering them to do, which was to tell them all the reasons that this ballot measure couldn't be done. They refused to do that. They really didn't do that. And they also went on to say they saw nothing illegal in the measure, either now or in the future. And we have that in writing, in correspondence with the city. So the city then appointed an ad hoc committee of the two newest council members who were apparently, they said, contacted by an organization, HTF, And incidentally, this organization is funded by one of the organizations that is primarily responsible for millions of dollars of graft money laundering, stealing of public funds in Los Angeles. But our city council went to these people, funded by the crooks in part, and funded by developers and by people who fund developers, went to them and said, give us a letter. So they got a letter saying it may be illegal if, it might if, and of course none of those are going to happen, none of those ifs. So those people then, and the yes in my backyard people, based on the assumption that we're going to reduce housing, which is purely an assumption because, in fact, it's going to increase housing. But based on that allegation, went and badgered the HCD, the Housing Community Development people, to send a letter saying what they wanted, which is, oh, what they're doing is illegal and blah, blah, blah. So the HCD, based on what they were told by these people, did send a letter saying, well, there's a possibility this could happen. But there were a lot of ifs, a lot of maybes, and we know that none of those will come about. And we know that this is all just scare tactics so that the city can continue developing these very tall buildings, primarily with this 3 different developers so far, but 8/10 of them are, well, actually, there's 11 now, so 8/11 of them were developed by coastal community builders. Did you have Jeannie Pleasant on your show talking about the trouble that they're having at San Luis Ranch in San Luis Obispo?
No, I had one of the other residents on the show.
If you go to Nightmare at San Luis Ranch on my Corruption Chronicles YouTube site, you'll hear it. It is worth paying attention to, especially if you live in Grover Beach or in San Luis Obispo or in any development that Gary Grossman is building at this point, because it just tells a horrific story, another horrific story of what's happening up there, another lawsuit about very poor quality of his build. And some of those issues that we were seeing up in San Luis Obispo that are now on the court record are arising already in the buildings which Grossman has built in Grover Beach. Issues of mold, issues of large cracks appearing in buildings and in stairs.
Stu brought up that there had been a letter from the state housing regarding the project. Now, what Stu said, he didn't think it was that they can stop it with this. It was more of the city trying to say this letter means it should be stopped. Please explain to us and clarify what is going on.
It's the story that I just went through, which is that the city's been trying very hard to get someone to provide them with some kind of correspondence saying they can't do this, they can't do this, they can't do this. So far, they haven't been successful. To explain, Stu is an attorney with years of experience in public law and has a radio show about it, and also years of experience in elections. And he's saying he doesn't see anything in that letter that says that this measure can't be enforced or can't be used.
I'm not sure the state is trying to fight it.
Something came out, a state statement came out, didn't it?
Well, yes, it did, but this is the No Tall Buildings initiative that the people of Grover Beach put on the ballot over the objections of most of the city council that wanted to be able to permit tall buildings right down by the beach when their local coastal plan and all of their other planning had limited the height of buildings there so that the view would be preserved. What the state said is, well, if that happens, then the city of Grover Beach, to meet its allocation for new housing that has been set by SLOCOG, there's regional allocations of housing for every city and every community so that we can have more housing to hopefully lower the cost of housing and get people off the streets. What the state said was the city would have to allow more housing in other parts of Grover Beach. It's not the state saying that the initiative should not pass. It's the state saying that the city council and the city planning department are going to have to increase housing in other parts of Grover Beach, which there's plenty of places to do that.
I was told that something just came down in the last few days from the Housing Authority. Is this what you were aware of?
This is the letter that came from the State Housing Authority. Some of the opponents and the developers who want to build the tall buildings right down by the beach, because that's where they can make real big money, they're saying that the state said that somehow the city's going to violate the law if they're not allowed to build down there. The state didn't say that. The state did say if this passes, it's going to require that other development be allowed in other parts of the city in order to increase the housing up to the limits that have been set by Slocog. We have all seen politicians spin one little fact into a whole lot more, and that's what's going on there.
And the city can always come out and say, we're going to agree to what you want, and you don't have to put it on the ballot.
Yes, but then if the city changes its mind later and wants to adopt something that the initiative forbid, they have to put it back on the ballot for people to approve. That's why cities are so anxious to keep, even if they effectively repeal what they've done without adopting the exact language of the initiative, then they can come back and try it again.
The afternoon of when the agenda item was going to appear on July 27th, which is probably a Brown Act violation, there was a letter from the HCD, Housing Community Development Department of the state of California, saying the city would need to do this, the city would need to do that, we'd need to make sure that you haven't reduced that potential for housing below the 2018 levels, which it does not, and various things that would need to be complied with, and of course, notwithstanding other state laws, which include in the coastal zone where most of these are being built, the protection of the public coastal views and view sheds. This letter is really nothing more than a scare tactic that the city badgered the HCD into supplying, along with threats from these housing and development nonprofits, some of which are involved in some really serious court cases and charges.
Going forward, do you think this is going to cause any trouble to getting this on the ballot?
Already on the ballot. August 7th was the last day it could have been pulled by the proponents, and they had no intention of pulling it. In fact, the city had put together what they called an ad hoc committee, and it was the two newest council members who were supposed to meet with the three proponents of this measure, convince them, and they've said this in a public meeting, it's on record, take it off the ballot. The proponents said no. Well, first of all, they were never consulted about attending the ad hoc committee, and it was just put together. And they said, no, first of all, you're not going to have a public meeting. If we're going to talk about this, we want it talked about it in public. We want it on the record. Second, 1,256 people in Grover Beach said that they want no more tall buildings, and we're not going to violate the signatures and the wishes of those 1,200 people who signed our initiative. And we want a town hall meeting. We want you to open it up to the whole community to come in and tell you what they really think. And the city refused. Then the city went on, this ad hoc committee went on to coerce the HCD into sending this letter. But the reality is, right now, Grover Beach is in the first year of a cycle that they have to create every 5 years, and their 5 years is up. It's time for review our development plan. And our track record is incredible. We have created at least twice as much, and in some cases 5 times as much housing where it's been built over the last few years we predicted we would. So there is no shortage of ability to produce the housing that's needed. And we're talking about housing, not expensive condos, but real housing for real people. This F-26 will help with that. And there's no shortage. We're going to make it just fine. But the city needs to get on it. And that's the problem. The city would rather fight with us, fight with its citizens, than get on with the job at hand, which is making sure that we can create real housing for real people and preserve the public views, which is required by law.
Are there any of the tall buildings that are being put in the city right now, are there any of them that you think are fine?
Well, here's a really interesting thing. The design that people like most of all that's been built so far is the affordable apartments on 13th and Grand. That is the nicest design, according to most people. What an irony that is. That's the affordable housing units. What's happening with the Grossman units is that they look inside, in my like a Ramada Inn room. They're high-range prices, poor build, mid-range quality, with a lot of issues already occurring. People do not like the designs. They're very boxy. They've been likened to refrigerators stacked on top of each other. So for the most part, the designs are not appreciated. But the other problem is when they put their concept, which is what the Planning Commission passes, when they put their application with their concept for the building to the Planning Commission, what they show they're going to build is not what it looks like when it is built. So you can see these wonderful, lovely building designs, and then what shows up is something that you'd see on any downtown street or university dormitory building.
There are a lot of empty units right now, correct?
Well, some of them aren't built yet. 2 of the buildings are built, and apparently only the first one has been sold out. Second one has not yet, apparently. That was released in the City Council meeting on July 27th of this year. And then there are the new units that are coming up at what's called Trinity, which is the one that's 22 feet from the train rails. That one apparently is not sold out either, and we're seeing the prices dropping on that one. I think they're in for some trouble right now, these builders, because we're having such trouble in the market. The economy is not great. Nobody can afford to buy these units. As they develop more and more and more and more of them, and there's about 400 to 500 in the works now, I think it's going to become harder and harder for those developers to stay in business even, perhaps.
And so you have condos in the $1 million range that are 22 feet from a railroad track. Are there trains moving through there on a regular basis, or is it once or twice a day?
It's several times a day for the Amtrak trains, and there are freight trains that run along there. They can be 2-mile freight trains. I live very near the train station, and I can tell you that when people come over to my house, they say, "Hey, Debbie, your pictures are crooked." And I go, I know. When you have a 2-mile freight train rolling through town, it kind of rattles your house. And these are closer than I am. I'm not 22 feet. I'm significantly further. I'm probably 10 times that far away, but it still rattles my walls. So I think that there are going to be some real issues there. There's a very high water table. There's a moderate liquefaction factor. It is in the tsunami zone. I would want to live in one of those units.
So, Debbie, this is coming forward. They weren't able to get it not on the ballot. They can't stop you. I wonder how they stop this from happening, though, because I'm seeing almost every one of these initiatives that the City Council didn't want. I'm seeing the battle against letting it go through. What can they do?
Well, right now there's nothing that they can do about A26, which is elect our city clerk in Grover Beach, and F26, which is no more tall buildings or limit building heights in Grover Beach. Those will be on the November ballot. And if that's of concern to you, regardless what your opinion is, we need you to get out there and vote. Now, what I would advocate for is if it says 26 on the ballot and you're in Grover Beach, A or F26, just vote yes. Because it puts the power back in the hands of the people of Grover Beach where it belongs. It's a form of direct democracy.
And we have a couple callers trying to get in. Let me get a caller. Sure. Welcome to Sound Off. What would you like to bring to the conversation?
My name is Kelvin Kovduk, and I'm one of the organizers of the F26 initiative. One of the reasons I'm calling is I've been attending city council meetings for the last year, almost every one, I would say 90% of them. And one of the problems is they don't respond and listen to you. One of the things that I constantly brought up in regards to the tall buildings on Front Street was that they are blocking the scenic views and vistas. And the argument of the city is that there are no scenic views and vistas. And as Debbie had mentioned, in the Coastal Act of 1976, they're saying that there are scenic views and vistas, but they refuse to recognize them. So what I suggested was that they designate certain roads in Grover Beach as scenic views and vistas, and they would not even consider it for a vote. And it's things like that that are very frustrating, that when they don't take an effort to modify the local coastal plan, send it up to Sacramento, and then what that would do would prevent the builders from blocking the dunes in the Pacific Ocean. And so there's solutions. And it's things like that that are very frustrating as a citizen.
That's really encouraging, Kelvin. I love it that you say that there are solutions, because there are so many solutions. And the one that the city had put together in their local coastal program, which is still part of our development code, names a number of streets, names areas, and is really pretty specific. But somehow our community development people have managed to work around that, whether legally or not. I think it's great. I don't know if you mentioned you're running for city. I sure hope you get elected, because we need some solutions.
I think we need city council members that work with the people, and such as town halls. My only experience is going to these meetings, and so maybe that's what we need, are grassroots citizens in the city council.
And going to meetings, yeah.
Thank you very much for calling in. When I was asked what should people do, I don't mean what could the city council do. What does the public do when the city council is not listening to them? You were on the city council, and I know there are times I've watched city council meetings when the public is arguing something that they would like to see, but it's just not going to happen. But what can the citizens do? For example, we had the paid parking here and we had the initiative. There are people upset about different things in the community. What are the best ways to get their voices heard?
There are so many different ways to do it, and we all have different skill sets and gifts. Obviously, these kinds of measures are effective. They explain clearly what people want, but you can go to the council meetings, you can call into the council meetings and planning commission meetings, you can send them emails, you can send letters to City Hall, you can post on social media. If you've got the money, and you can find an attorney who knows how to handle it, you can get an attorney involved, you can go to the press and media, and you can go to some of the watchdog agencies as well. Even government has its own watchdog agencies, so you can sometimes go up the line. If you have good evidence for law breaking, you can go to Dandel, you can go to the California Attorney General, you can go to the Federal Attorney General, you can go to the FBI, you can go to your local police department, and then there's lots of other agencies out there too that do monitoring of things. And so there's any number of things, and my recommendation is the more the people who do it, the more likely you are to be heard. So go to the meetings, meet people, get a crowd together. You can picket, you can protest on the streets, carry signs. I don't recommend blocking streets or breaking the law, but you do have a right to free speech. You can carry a sign, march around with it. That's not illegal. There are a whole lot of things that people can do, and if they do them, and they do them consistently over time, they will win. I didn't say that. Vote's the most important thing.
Vote is the most important thing. I have seen going to the meetings and speaking out does do a good job. And I have seen a large change in the amount of people questioning where grant money is being spent, what city councils are doing. You look at what's happened in the city of SLO. The mayor became involved in a grand jury issue, and it was citizens who had earlier been afraid to speak out that did public records requests and found out there had been a violation of the law and became very active in making sure the community knew about it.
That's right. You can start a website. You can write a book. What worries me about the city of San Luis Obispo and that correspondence, that text correspondence, is quite a few posts about Gary Grossman in glowing colors. And that worries me because we're seeing that it looks like there's relationship. The people who came down to work in the Grover Beach Planning Department, Kyle Bell, worked for the city of SLO, worked in affordable housing, much of which didn't happen, or one of which went to a former mayor, Jan Mark, and then Pismo Beach's person who worked in affordable housing but didn't ever really make it happen or didn't make the deeds appropriate to pass on in a timely manner. She came to Grover Beach, and then a lot of these public officials went to work for Gary Grossman's company. So there's a lot of really incestuous behavior that appears to be planned and coordinated. It appears that the mayor of SLO and Cal Poly are all part of all of this. It's worrying. We've got to pay attention.
You have 5 council members at Cal Poly, or at the city of SLO. I called it Cal Poly, slip of the tongue. And Cal Poly is not in the city limits, but out of the 5 members of the council, the mayor and the council, there's only one who is not tied to Cal Poly. Either they work there or their spouses did or do. Only one person is not tied to Cal Poly on that council.
Wow. And, that's another thing that people never mention. Cal Poly is also a government institution. It's a state university, and so we've got to pay attention to all of them.
As in one thing also, the federal prosecutor's office in L.A. is becoming very aggressive going after looking at grant money, looking at money that went through several programs, grant programs, including with our county. There's over $300 million in fraud that they have found, and I think they've only gone after about $50 million of it so far. They say more arrests and more information will be coming out soon. There is a goal to go look at city councils. I think the FBI arrested people in Oakland in the last couple of days, or they raided the mayor's home. I do see a lot the movement with the federal government looking at councils and mayors and conflicts of interest. Grant money is extraordinary what is going on right now.
Well, and that's one of the reasons we were worried about this one organization that was advising the city council, is that they were part of that investigation you're mentioning for millions of dollars in L.A. going astray, millions of dollars of public funds going astray in L.A.
Welcome to Sound Off. What would you like to bring to the conversation?
Thank you, Ms. Peterson, for coming on to the show. I was calling in because I was curious if
any of your group have noticed, it seems like the machinery in San Luis Obispo and philosophies and manipulation of planning policy and zoning and shell games have been shifted to Grover Beach because it seems like there's similar players, similar concepts that have been used in the past. And I was wondering if any of you guys have been evaluating this? Because, for example, Kyle Bell was instrumental cog in the wheel in creating what's occurred in San Luis Obispo. We also see Jules, her husband, was involved with the San Luis Ranch and apparently denying residents smoke inspections. And I just wonder if you guys have put any focus on that. That's my first question. The second question is that the debacle with Erica Stewart in the city of San Luis Obispo, working behind the scenes, violating a grand jury instruction to the detriment of residents and actually kind of being disparaging towards them while working with Cal Poly. And apparently Mr. Grossman's referenced in some of those as the developer because of his relationships with Poly. Have you guys taken any look at this, of maybe the years of hassles in San Luis Obispo have now just shifted to new lands, being Grover Beach?
Well, I think that's really astute. Thank you so much, because we know that Grossman is going to be building, if not already building, at Cal Poly. We do see those relationships. We see people, it would appear, almost being recruited because of being able to do some of those things, supposed to do low-income housing but not doing low-income housing. We've got Kyle Bell, we've got Megan, our community development director, and Martin. So yes, we are seeing some of those relationships, and they're too close for comfort. And I think it's safe to say to PATH or anybody else, Pismo, coming to a city near you. Be aware, be very aware.
Yeah, it's pretty frightful to see that this is just pushing forward. And when you have elected officials and hired officials that are supposed to be protecting the community and the residents and their quality of life and their neighborhoods and their businesses, they seem to instead treat their constituents and those they're supposed to serve as a nuisance for out-of-area big money interests, because it's kind of clear a lot of the kingpins that people think are kingpins in San Luis are developers really backed by out-of-area money, such as the Assimi family that's just laden with corruption-related lawsuits, and then Presidio.
And the Resnicks.
And the Resnicks. And it just becomes shocking that it's just so blatantly out there. And now Grover Beach just seems like a new area to exploit, because where else are they going to exploit San Luis unless, Jan Marks is successful at handing over the parks to the developer constituents and out of money interests. And I just was wondering where your position on that all is.
I see the connections that you're seeing, and I hear confirmation of it from other folks out in the community who are paying attention, and I think what you're saying is extremely valid. And one of the other things that we observe is that although our city tells us, we have to build up, we don't have any choice, which is not true. We don't see that in any other cities. Other cities are building 2- and 3-story buildings. They're creating, and we did too, they're creating affordable housing more than is being created in the very tall buildings. Yes, we're seeing that some of these myths that are coming down the line being perpetrated by developers like Grossman and some of the other developers of the tall buildings, they are no more than myths. If you go through and you really evaluate where the affordable homes are being built and how they're being built, you're going to see that it didn't happen in San Luis Obispo with Kyle Bell. It didn't happen in Pismo Beach with Megan Martin, and now they're both in Grover Beach. The affordable is not happening, but the way upper range blocks of condos, expensive luxury condos, or so-called luxury condos, those are all happening in great numbers.
Yeah, it's just an unfortunate situation that those that are trusted to protect are destroying the community and destroying people's neighborhoods and destroying their lives in many instances, because it's a really shameful thing when we see our local friends and neighbors fall prey to this, where they're willing to shaft their neighbors. And there's just too much of this happening and nothing being done. I just wanted to make that point.
Thank you. And you have to wonder, too, how much of this is being done to bring in funds to support the overrated salaries of some of these folks. As I said before, a city manager in Grover Beach, 12,000 people, makes $400,000 a year by the time you put in his benefits and everything else, and has a city manager assistant. You have to wonder if there isn't some incentive there to the city authorities to build so that they can subsidize their very high salaries.
Yeah, the skew of salaries is pretty absurd that's occurring within the county when compared to other comparable towns. And then we look at the county manager who the Board of Supervisors stands behind,
and the way he shafted Dan Dow, trying to cripple Dan's ability to police some of this stuff and bring some justice, and just look at his background. And I think if you just use the county manager or county administrator that I've brought in, he comes in with the qualifications that Grover Beach and the city of San Luis Obispo and other areas apparently need, and comes a high price to find somebody that's willing to do what some of these elected and employed representatives of the community are doing to the community. It's just very sad.
Thank you very much for calling in. In Paso Robles, there was a push to change the contractor out at the airport that sells gas and does repairs on airplanes. And there was an argument with some, wait a minute, there you have the English Air Force, you have military. The former ACI jet was bringing these groups in. Well, they cut it. Their revenue for the sales, for the gas tax is way down. There was an estimated $10 million a year brought in by these groups. They stayed in hotels. They ate in restaurants. That's gone. But then very interesting, I was watching the city council meeting, the last city council meeting, I think it was a week or two ago, and you had an update on the airport, and they showed pictures of a plane from the English Air Force showing up, and they said, yes, they're down in San Luis Obispo now, but they still come up here and they still visit us, and they still come here at some times. Instead of saying, yes, we lost a lot of revenue, they literally showed pictures on a screen of a plane from the English Air Force stopping for an event at the airport. And again, it's public officials promoting their decisions during council meetings that did not help the city.
In other words, we're seeing self-interest on the part of elected representatives instead of the public's best interest. And that's when you start seeing measures coming around. So vote, 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 vote.
And as you know, sales tax and property tax and TOT tax are your number one revenues. The airport belongs to the citizens, belongs to the city. And there was not only the tax of the sales tax on the gas, but TOT went down, and a lot of stays in hotels in the city and a lot of visiting the restaurants downtown. It has an impact when it's explained that that's happening. And the argument was, I had several council members tell me, oh, no, they're here because of us. They love the city. They're not here because he made an agreement with them and brought them here. And the English Air Force now, they stay in SLO. They stay at hotels in SLO. The planes gas up in SLO. It took a ton of revenue from the city and the business owners in this community when they made a change without considering all the issues.
Absolutely. If there are council members who have an association with the airport or anywhere else, they should be recusing themselves and allowing those who do not have a potential bias or conflict of interest to make the decisions.
Absolutely. And Debbie, I really thank you about what you've done for the initiative process in this county and for coming on the show today.
Thank you for giving us your ear. We appreciate it.